Welcome back to another episode of the Jessica Aller podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Aller, Australia's leading women's trauma therapist and founder of Aruka Therapy. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the 3 essential stages of healing, which can be really confusing because so many people will tell you healing is non-linear, which is true because, as you progress through your healing journey, you find that there are deeper levels of trauma or deeper levels of grief, of sadness, fear, or whatever it is. But I've spoken about in past episodes, we're never going backwards, we're only ever going deeper. And so in a way, it is linear. We are always moving forwards. But the 3 essential stages of healing was something that I developed, I don't even know how many years ago. And it was something that I developed after working with thousands of women, noticing the patterns, noticing the stages that ideally we needed to move through in order to actually heal and get to this point where we're actually living a really happy, fun, free life. And it's really difficult because so many women get stuck in different stages. So we're going to talk about these different stages today. And it's not just women, it's people that get stuck in these ways of being or in these stages. So the first essential stage of healing is awareness. And there are so many people who live their entire lives with zero awareness of their thoughts, of their thought patterns, of the patterns that they're playing out, of the way that they are. They just are living completely unconsciously from those patterns and from those beliefs. And they have no understanding of the fact that you can actually change your reality. You can change your perception. You can change your subconscious beliefs. There's so many people that just never even reach this first stage of healing. And when you do reach this first stage I know for me, it was this, I read this book and that my mum had given me, and I was reading about subconscious beliefs, and I had this moment of, wait. Our beliefs create our perception of our entire reality, and you can change those beliefs, and you can change your reality, and you can change the way that you think about yourself, and you can change the thoughts that are in your mind. Was just mind-blowing to me. I was 19, 20 at the time, but it was just this completely new world just opened up for me. And so many of us get into this world and we have this information and we want to tell everybody. we're like, did you know that that's a belief? And did you know that that's your subconscious? And did you know that and we want to introduce people into it because we're so mind blown by it. But there's so many people that just don't want to know about that. They don't want to know about their thoughts. They don't want to know about their beliefs. And they don't have this level of self-awareness yet to be able to self-inquire. And so the first step is realization that healing is actually possible, that change is actually possible. And what happens is a lot of people have this realization and they start to go on this healing journey. And they start reading self-help books, but some people move into the realm of spirituality, which I love the realm of spirituality. But if you have this realization that healing is possible and change is possible, and that there's this whole world that exists outside of the tunnel vision that we've had, and you jump into spirituality, there can be this level of bypassing. And what happens is we go from everything matters to nothing matters. And just surrender and just let it go. And it's all, part of the story and non-attachment. And we start to hear these spiritual concepts that feel really good because it's like, oh, I'm not what happened to me. I'm not what happened to me. I'm not my past. The past is in the past. We leave it there. We focus on the present. And these concepts are really powerful, but they fall into, in my perspective and opinion and experience, a different stage of healing. And the reason that I sort of came across these stages of healing is because I thought, well, when I was at this awareness or this realization phase and I was introduced to spirituality, I kept coming back to this one thought. And the thought was these monks and these Buddhist people and these spiritual teachers like Ram Dass and these gurus are telling me to just surrender my pain, surrender my story, that the story doesn't matter. And I'm doing it, but I'm constantly having flashbacks of horrific things. And my body is living in a constant state of panic no matter how much I meditate. And I had this thought of how much have some of these people actually been through? Have they been through complex trauma that is so intense that has literally altered the way that their brain functions? Or have they lived a pretty pretty wholesome, unscathed lifestyle that allows them to be in the present moment, that allows them to work through some of those layers of grief and pain and, normal human suffering that we might experience. But how much have they actually endured? And is it going to work for somebody who's been, trigger warning of my own history, but who's been tortured, raped, molested? Like, how much have they actually been through that's literally altered their nervous system, every cell in their body stuck in survival mode, flashbacks, like a brain that functions in an unhealthy way because it's learned how to function that way in survival. And I realized in this moment that there is a difference between healing and spirituality, and that I can get to that place where the past didn't matter and I can surrender and have non-attachment and let it all go. But I actually do have to deal with my human first, because at the end of the day, spirituality would tell us that we're a soul or a spirit, or, we're consciousness having a human experience. And that human part is really important. We're having a human experience. We're in a human body that is working with, the laws of the universe, laws of gravity, of energy. Like, we're governed by our biology, by our bodies, by a lot of different laws that you can't just bypass with spirituality. And so this is where I started to realize that spirituality and the concepts have its place, but for me, they were in the third stage of healing. What I noticed as well is that as I started to have this epiphany of like, oh, we actually have to work on our human first, and then we have to work on the spirituality. And there was this, I don't know who the man is, but I watched this documentary and he said something that stuck with me, which was that the human ego needs to be crystallized before it can be dismantled. And he was talking about, like, we need to work on the human. We need to crystallize the ego. We need to prove to ourselves that we're worthy and we're powerful and that we can create, the life that we want and all of those things before we realize and dismantle it, before we realize that none of that matters and we can surrender. But in order to do that, we need to work through the pain and the suffering and the trauma and the humanness first. So stage 1 is realization, and ideally stage 2 is the humanness, is working on the work, as people call it. It's the emotions, it's the beliefs, it's the memories, it's the pain, it's the suffering, it's all of that which is stored in our human. So what I noticed a lot of spiritual people were doing was they were moving from realization phase to the spiritual phase. And they were moving to nothing matters, and they were meditating, and they were getting so high on life and on transcendental meditation, and they were getting to this point, and then they were coming back into their humanness and coming back into their suffering, or they were stuck so high. And what happens is, and another thing that I started to notice and I started to research and then I started to become really quite passionate about, was that traumatized people have a direct channel to consciousness. Traumatized people are so good at dissociating because they had to leave their bodies. And we talk about dissociation in clinical terms of the consciousness and leaving the human experience. And we talk about it as there are different levels of dissociation where we can check out. We can just go from daydreaming to like full-blown personality disorders, where we have depersonalization and derealization, where we literally leave our human. We see this as a bad thing, but actually what I discovered was that so many people with trauma did so well in spirituality because just meditation and connecting with consciousness is the same pathway as dissociation. It's the same channel. And so these people were able to just leave their bodies and check into this place of consciousness, of the quantum field, so easily because they'd done it a million times because of their trauma. And so it felt really good to them to be spiritual because they were like, I'm not me. I'm not my past. I'm not my history. And that's a really good feeling. And I experienced that. But what would happen is when I had to go to work, or when I was in a relationship, or when I was with my kids, or when like daily life was happening and I wasn't in that dissociative connected theta brainwave state, I was in my human, and my human sucked and being in my human sucked. And I would come back from nothing matters and this is just my story and I'm connected to the universe, to life is shit and I hate life and I hate who I am and I hate my body and I hate the way I look and I hate who I am. So much self-hatred was just stuck in this human. And so the only way that I could maintain this feeling of lightness was to just be meditating all the time, which is not realistic for most people. And so I started to notice there were these spiritual people who you could literally see when you looked at them all of their pain, but they were just completely unaware because they just detached from their human. They were just so like, woo, in the clouds, not with it, so out of this world because they just had grasped onto this concept of spirituality to bypass their pain. And you can tell now when someone's done the work, when they're spiritual and they're open and they're surrendering and they're using those spiritual concepts, but they've actually done the work because they're grounded. They're not completely off this planet, head in the clouds and just speaking about concepts that no one can grasp. So there's this phase where we have to do the work. So stage 2 to me is the work. And it took me 15 years of doing the work to figure out how to do it faster, essentially. But for me, the work looked like, and for so many of you, I know you'll relate, that you go through and you come into this world of healing and there's so many options. There's so much that you can do. There's breath work and there's somatics and there's an acronym for every DBR and EMDR and RTT. And there's just so many things that you don't know about and you research and you're like, this sounds amazing. And we start to make our way through a number of different modalities. This is where I started to discover that I started to think, why do some things work for some people and not for other people? And why do some things work so profoundly, so rapidly, and other things don't have as much of an effect? And what's actually happening in each of these modalities? And I started to look down all of those ones that I just listed, as well as hypnotherapy and NLP and EFT and TFT and reconnective healing and theta healing. And I studied so many different types of healing before I started to understand why each of them were working and why they were not working. So stage 2 is about the work. And if you do this stage right, it really doesn't have to take as long as it did for me, because what we're looking for in this stage is everything to do with the human. And so when I think about the human aspect, everything does come back to energy, which sounds woo-woo. But if we think about it, everything in the universe, quantum physics has proven, is made up of energy. And so if we break anything down and we think about that in terms of, you know, the physical things around us, but also our beliefs, our memories that we hold, and the thoughts that we have all have their own frequency. And so what we need to be doing here is we need to be processing. If we want to elevate our state, if we want to be moving from shame and grief and pain and suffering and this victim mentality up into a feeling of like hope and love and joy and ecstasy, and starting to feeling these like really high vibrational feelings, we have to process everything that our human is carrying that is in those lower levels. And so for me, something that I discovered was that every thought that we have comes from a belief, and every belief comes from a moment or a memory. And the frequency of the thought, which creates the action, the frequency of the thought matches the frequency of the belief, which matches the frequency of the memory. I started to think about it as if we have all of these memories creating the beliefs and they have their own frequency, once we start to, for instance, the work for me is when I work with clients, we're going back into the memories. First things first, like a lot of therapists, a lot of modalities will tell you that you can heal without ever going back into the past. You don't need to go into it. You don't need to look at it. And I find that that's completely untrue for everybody that I've worked with. Going back into the memory and correctly processing it, which means putting the person into a theta brainwave so that they can access the memory from a level that is beyond their programming, behind the programming, so they can see it for what it was. We get them to go into the memory. And if this is a memory that is loaded with fear and panic, a memory where they felt completely unsafe, the goal of processing here is, and this is where the 4 pillars of Aruka come in, the goal of processing here is to incorporate the body, the mind, like the things that the brain actually really needs to know, the nervous system, and the energy and frequency of all of those things. So we're going back into this memory, and in order to process it, we're allowing this person to maybe say the things that they want to say out loud, because words spoken are so much more powerful for the brain to register that that has actually happened. If you're in a hypnotic-like state and you're saying it out loud versus in your head, the shift there is profound, number 1. But 2, we're getting them to go in and change the memory. And what happens is when we get them to go in and change the memory, we can take a memory where they felt unsafe and where they felt fear and where they felt panic, and we can allow them through a number of different techniques, like saying things out loud, like moving their body, because the body needs to be incorporated here. This is where somatics comes into play. A lot of people process things in their head, laying down stiff as a board straight, and all of the trauma is still held in their body. So we're incorporating the body into this. We're getting them to move, to scream, to make sounds, to cry, to move their body in the way that they want to move in this memory. And I often have people, pushing their hands, saying stop and move back. And they're actually allowing their body to become a part of this process. Once they're doing that and they're bringing back some power, and they're maybe taking their younger self out of the situation, taking them to a safe place, and we've then come out of this memory and we've shifted the beliefs of I'm not safe and, whatever the memory was, like this isn't safe or this person's not safe. Once we shift those subconscious beliefs, we've shifted the energy of the memory visually by changing the visuals, by purging the emotions, by allowing the body to move in the way that it couldn't move. We're moving into shifting the subconscious beliefs, which basically cuts the thought pattern of those future thoughts. And then we're creating this feeling of safety. All of a sudden, this person is moving up from feeling fear to feeling safety and love and connection and whatever it is that we've implanted. You do that with enough memories and this person is moving up in what we call the levels of consciousness. And all of a sudden, they're feeling stronger, more powerful, more confident, more alive, more free, and they're starting to love their human more. This is the stage where we then move from this doing the work, from this deeper work into the spiritual realm, where we start to go, actually, none of that did ever really matter. And our human story here is really just a human story. And that if we zoom out, we're just a part of this giant field and that none of it really ever mattered. We can move into that phase, but from a grounded place of still understanding, still loving our human, still loving who we are when we get to be human. And so for me, I've always said to people, the idea is to take the desires of the spiritual, the desires of the soul, of consciousness, and reprogramming that into the human so that we get to experience. Because really at the end of the day, if you break down anything that any single person suffers with or struggles with, it's emotion, it's feeling. Because it's not the relationship problem, it's the way it's making you feel. It's not the job, it's the way it's making you feel. It's not the friend, it's the way they're making you feel. It's not anything, it's the way that it's making you feel. And it's our inability to know what to do with those feelings. We don't know what to do with the anger or the sadness or the grief or the loneliness or the pain. We don't know what to do with it. And so every problem that we have comes from the fact that we don't know how to handle that. This needs to become part of the work, because the reality is, unless you are going to move, to a different country and become a monk and meditate 24/7 every day, you're going to be a human. You're going to have a job probably, and you're going to be living, or a business, and you're going to be living in this materialistic world. And so you need to have a human that you like being in. You need to be a human that you like. And a lot of the time, this is the part that people miss. And they don't realize that part of that spiritual side of things is actually taking those feelings that you want to feel and finding a way to feel them that isn't bypassing. Because, we can take drugs to bypass the pain and feel epic. We can take, we can have coffee to raise our vibration, to raise our energy if we're feeling tired and lethargic. We've got all of these hacks. We've got all of these little things. So alcohol to relax us or to give us more confidence. We've got, a lot of people will eat to avoid their feelings. We've got scrolling to numb ourselves from the pain of being human. We've got so many different things there available. But actually what we're trying to do is elevate ourselves to feel the good feelings. That's all we really want. That's all we're avoiding the pain and suffering to feel the good feelings. We want to feel the love, the joy, the connection. And we think that we need something outside of ourselves to do that. Doing the work is actually facing and feeling those levels of pain and facing those past traumas and facing everything so that you can transform it, so that you can move up to those levels and feel joy and love and freedom and power and all of those things all the time as a human, because you've done the work. You don't need the substance. You don't need the addiction, the habit, the pattern to feel the feeling. You have the feeling in you because you've transformed the old pain. So you have to go into it. You have to feel it to heal it, is the saying. But people think that they're going to go into the pain and they're going to go into the work and they're going to go into the suffering and they're going to get stuck there. It's the biggest trap. We think I'm going to open up Pandora's box or open this can of worms and it's just going to never end. And it can feel like that, which is why people often open it up and then they numb themselves again and it's too much. And then they try it again and then they numb themselves. And we go through this cycle because we haven't learned that the emotions and the feelings, they're chemical reactions, really. They can't actually hurt us. They're feelings. And once we actually understand, beyond feeling is sensation. Underneath feeling in our brainstem, we have a shock, we have a reaction, we have this response where our body goes into panic or fear or grief or whatever it is. We have this reaction that is below an emotional level. The amygdala actually is signaled by the brainstem. So we actually have sensation before we have emotion. So what a lot of people do is they feel the emotion and they attach it to a story and a narrative and a memory. And yes, that is there. But before that, there is sensation. And so what I teach a lot of people is when you have the anxiety, when you have the grief, when you have the panic, the pain, the whatever it is, you close your eyes and you actually notice what that feels like in a sensation. And you don't put an emotion to it, but you notice my left arm feels numb. My fingers feel tingly. My arms feel heavy. My chest feels tight. And you actually notice it in terms of sensations and it takes the emotional charge away from it. And it actually allows you to feel safe within your body and safe with the sensations of that emotion. Biggest hack I could probably ever give anyone. Like, go to the sensations, sit with the sensations first, allow the sensations. And what happens with a lot of people is, I know for myself as someone with so much trauma, I would try that. And the sensations would be so overwhelming. Every cell in my body would want to jump out of my body. Like I would feel tense and agitated and tight. And like I wanted to, it sounds so intense, but it felt like I wanted to like rip off my skin. Like I would want to just be out of my body. It felt so uncomfortable to be in my body. That sensation I actually had to hold. I actually had to lay there and feel that and let that build and just allow that to move through my body. And for me, that looked like tensing or twitching or moving in the way that my body wanted to move when those sensations arose. And as soon as my mind started to attach, I'm feeling that because of this trauma and this trauma and this trauma, I'd have to bring myself back to the sensation and allow the sensation to move. And it actually is an incredibly powerful way of moving yourself through these triggers. Now, as I said, memories will come up, emotions will come up. And yes, they need to be felt. Yes, they need to be processed. But one of the most powerful things that we can do to allow ourselves to even feel safe to go into those memories, to even feel safe to feel those emotions, is to calm down that activation from the brainstem in the first place. So that's the 3 stages of healing: the realization, then moving into the work, and then moving into none of it ever really mattered. And if we do it in that order, we find ourselves at the end having this beautiful balance between living in this idea of this is just a story that we're telling ourselves and we're living in this, almost like a simulation, whatever you want to call it, from this like higher state of just surrender and nothing matters and we're just going to let it all go. And then something happens and it pulls you back into your human, but you have the capacity to deal with that layer of healing. You have the capacity to deal with that death, that situation, that breakup, whatever it is, because you've worked on your fucking human, because you've actually done the work. So you pull yourself back out of the spiritual realm into your human and you've got all the tools. You've got the know-how to navigate and to feel the emotions and to process what's happening, to then move back into this place of none of it ever really mattered. And I'm just going to continue living my best life, essentially. So I hope this has helped someone today who maybe has been stuck in the work. I know that there's so many women that I've been 10 years deep into healing my trauma and I feel like I just keep bringing things up to work on. That's not a good place to be. That would tell me that you actually do need to move into assuming that everything's good, assuming that life's good, moving on, having fun, feeling free, like enjoy life now. Stop working on it. And if something really needs to be worked on, it's going to show you. It's going to come up in a big way. But assume the best. Live as if everything is happening as it should. Surrender, move into the flow of life, work on being present. And like I said, if you need to move back into stage 2, you'll know I'm going to move back, work on this, and then go back to living my best life again. So if you know somebody who needs to hear this, please share this episode. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever channel you're listening on. I would love it if you could rate this podcast. As you know, It's direct, it's clear, it's straight to the point, it's ad-free, and I do this to give you as much advice as I can and as much healing and direction as I can for free. So I would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.